We're on air.
All right, cool. And I will call to order the work session for June 15th, 2021. The first item we'll start with is a construction excise tax program update, which will be led by Kelly Brooks, our interim community development director.
Good evening, everyone. So with this presentation, I've attempted to strike a delicate balance. You all have, in many cases, quite a bit about the construction excise tax program. You've been here to help create it. Councilor Nicodemus, I know you were on the advisory body that helped establish the criteria. And after having rewatched about 3 or 4 different council meetings yesterday to get up to speed, I know you all have spent a lot of time and are very familiar with the program. But also not just have a bunch of acronyms that no one can understand. So my main objective of today is to tell you where I think we are with respect to implementation and to give you what I think are the key next steps to get us to applications for the program opening up, which to me is kind of the primary objective at this point, is how do we kind of get the program started so people can apply and use these resources to construct affordable housing. So with that, I'm going to open up my little PowerPoint. I think it's like 6 slides. We'll have plenty of time at the end to talk about all the questions that I'm sure are likely to pop up. And I'm going to do my thing. Good. You all seeing that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So just to recap for anybody watching at home and for myself to articulate, the construction excise tax is 1% tax levied on both residential and commercial construction over $100,000. Was established by the city in 2017. And the high level program goals are to develop new income restricted units, create equitable outcomes, and serve populations in financial need. Layla, I know I said in one meeting in a way that I liked a lot, it was like the point of the CET is to incentivize the type of housing we want to see. So that's why we have this excise tax. I was very hesitant to go in this direction because I've watched many discussions about AMI and the technicalities of AMI. And I'm not an expert, but I talk a lot about it as we move through. So I want to show you kind of the reference point that I'm working from. So when I say AMI, I'm talking about area median income. For the purposes of the CET, Milwaukee is a part of the Portland Metropolitan Statistical Area. So that's the broader Portland region. It is calculated by the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey data. And right now in 2021, the AMI for a family of 4 in the Portland, Vancouver, Hillsborough MSA is 96,900. So what you see below is a table. I talk in the presentation, and every time we talk about CET, we're mainly talking about that 80% up to 120% AMI. And so I just wanted, for anyone like me that sometimes gets lost and turned around in these conversations about what that means, the AMI is calibrated based on your household size. And so this is just a table showing you where people sit within that. Would anyone like to comment or tell me that I got this wrong before I move on? Okay. All right, because I was very worried about getting it wrong. So that's one part of CET, right? Part of the CET program is determining who is eligible based on their income to participate in the different programs, right? Then you have to also limit what does affordable mean and who decides what affordable means. And that's the actual your rent limits calculation. So these numbers are actually published every year by HUD, and that's the Housing and Urban Development agency, the federal level. They're giant. And the way they calculate it is using a household size of 1.5 people per bedroom with a rent burden of 30%. So just so folks, I'm sure you all know this, but for anybody listening, you're not supposed to have to spend more than 30% of your income on rent. And so this is what that looks like at that 80, 20, and 140% level in 2021. So I just wanted you guys to see that. And I think usually what people's takeaway is that's still a lot of money. That's still high rent, right? So that's true. And I can't counter that, but this is the way kind of the HUD calculation and the AMI work in the 2021 numbers world. And I just wanted to be really transparent about that. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on? Okay. So what is it? And again, you all know this, but we got 2 different pots. We have the residential development part of the construction excise tax fund. The important thing to know about this is the requirements for this are set in state law. This is for up to 80% AMI, which we just looked at. Use 50% of it on development incentives to build housing, 35% on programs, 15% is going to Oregon Housing and Community Services for home ownership assistance. So, helping people with down payment. And it has, for the residential side, it has to be 3 or more units, and that's in the state statute. I actually did go check that. There was some conversation you all had I can't remember whether it was the 2020 meeting or the last housing update, but just some questions about did that change? And I haven't seen any indication that part of the statute was revised. And then on the commercial side, that's actually set by city ordinance. So that can go up to 120%, but everything in the documentation about CET indicates that 80% is preferred. You've got 50% going to those developer incentives to build, and 50% going to economic development activities. And that is actually that subset of the commercial development pot is actually what paid the COVID business relief grant that you all worked on. And just so you all know, that has been replenished. So they did the initial infusion from the city and the supplemental then from there on, it was really passing through Business Oregon funds, not CET funds. And then with the recent supplemental that you all adopted, that has been replaced. And we'll talk about that at the revenue slide at the end. Do you all have any questions about this?
Yes.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about what the Oregon Housing and Community Services ownership assistance does, what that 15% really does?
Don't exactly know, but I can find that out and come back and actually send it back to you. If I can go find out what program that goes to exactly and how they do. I believe it's down payment assistance, but how they actually manage that program and the criteria for it and who all's eligible. I'm guessing there's a handy little, I would hope, 1-pager of some kind that would tell me how that works. And I could send that back out as a follow-up. Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be great. And that's really what I'm wondering is this something that we administer, or is just some funds that we pass through to a partner? Do we choose the partner?
This is straight pass through. We don't do anything. We give it to Oregon Housing and Community Services and they administer it.
Okay, so the money goes to the state or to the county?
State, I think.
Okay.
Right, Sam, Sam's nodding. Do you have a different answer to that? Sam knows.
No, I just know that I do the pass through at the end of every month when I balance all of my accounts, and it goes to the Oregon Housing. It's an actual line item that we send through and send a check off to them every month.
Okay.
Of what I've collected that month.
Okay.
I was right.
Good work.
Yeah, see, I did learn something. Okay. So yes, but I can find out what is that program and bring that back just so you all know.
Yeah, I'd just like to know how it's benefiting the community, basically.
And maybe they have some data on who it's gone to in Milwaukee.
Exactly.
Kelly, I have.
Yeah. Sorry, Mayor.
Angel, did you as well? Go ahead.
My question is just about the up to 80% AMI. Can you remind me? So that means we could set it lower.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I think that's just a cap. I think you can always go lower.
Okay, and my question, since what we're talking about with this grant program is smaller projects, not great big apartment complexes,
Mhm.
there must be 3 or more units. I mean, we're now in the middle of a very small subset of potential projects. You know, it can't be like somebody's ADU. It can't be somebody breaking 2 units out in their house. It literally has to be 3 units or more of affordable housing.
That's my understanding. And again, it would probably be good for me to check that with someone, but I haven't seen anything that changes that state requirement that for the residential side of CET, you have to be talking about 3 or more units. So there are, cottage clusters, quadplexes, triplexes. There are parts of that middle housing definition that fall within that, but you are right. It does not fit the ADU.
But wait a second. We decided that it was that we weren't going to use it for larger projects, because I don't read it as it's restricted. The program is like by statute restricted from larger multi units. No. It's just that the way we wrote our program, the way that okay.
I think I'll get to that in just a minute, because I think that's it. I hear you, Mayor, but also I think there's some things I need to touch on in terms of actions you all have taken that sort of start pointing us towards maybe a likely award pool, but the program, you're absolutely right, is not limited to those smaller projects. You can do big.
Sure.
It's fine. Yeah.
The way we've tended to use that thus far is just to negotiate before they've paid the CET for affordable housing units.
That's the next thing. Let me get to that part. I promise. I'll make it make sense. Okay. All right. So I'm going to leave these funding pots for just a second, but as long as anyone that wasn't already an expert in CET knows that there's 2 different pots. One is very tied to state standards. One is very tied to city standards. And they do have different uses. Okay. So the CTOG, which I love, our growing list of bodies that advise us on things, but that was the CET oversight group. And as I mentioned, Councilor Nicodemus served on that. Met, I believe it was 2019. I get kicked off late like September and then wrapped up towards the end of the year. And what they did is they looked at what type of criteria and requirements should the city use to pick projects. And so what they did some preferred project criteria and they did some project requirements. So on the preferred project criteria, it was missing middle housing, focus on the missing middle. Guaranteed income restriction, and they actually set that to 5 years or more. So there was some back and forth on, 3 to 5, and the committee was like, we really think it should be 5 or more. Located near public transit and serving underserved populations or organizations that further fair housing. And then on the project requirements, like you can't pass go without it. You have to demonstrate that your project is ready and that you can construct it within the time frame that we would be awarding you funds. And you have to be able to demonstrate your financial need. So you have to be able to prove that you wouldn't be able to do this without the funding, and that you'd be serving the populations intended. So those are the requirements. Fund balances as of today, and this is hot off the press, been working with Keith. But right now we're sitting at about 287 in the residential pot and 278 in the commercial pot. And that is actual money to spend. So just so you know, and again, I'll refine these more over time, numbers, and gut check them more, but these are the best ones I can give you today. The mayor had asked me a question about sort of nibbling away at these resources, and it was kind of getting around the administrative cost issues. So the way the CET was built, it's got 4% baked in for administrative. I've taken that 4% off here. It doesn't mean it's all been spent on administrative, but I wanted you all to see it minus the administrative. And so that's what you're looking at, if that helps. Okay, so when you all I did a combination of things. I looked at the last CET update was actually in 2020. And then you all had a housing goal update in April, I believe, with Layla and Christina, where you talked about CET again. And I kind of cobbled together the list of action items that I think I was hearing next steps from those conversations. One of them in the January meeting was the multifamily exemption to the CET. So this was proposed by Layla, and this goes back to the conversation, the topic that the mayor just brought up. So when you're a large multifamily developer, in many cases, it makes more sense to just not pay the CET than to build something, then apply for grants to backfill to help you offset the cost of the affordable units. So what you all did is you created and amended the code to allow, if a developer can prove that the city will receive 2 times the benefit for the foregone revenue by incorporating affordable units into their project, then you can qualify for a CET exemption. So that's like the coho, right? They would apply for a CET exemption. They wouldn't apply to get a grant. And so I think that's where, I think if I'm understanding what the mayor's saying, the program, because of that exemption, is even more kind of moving a little bit more towards supporting those smaller scale developers, because the larger developers would most likely opt for the exemption over applying to a grant program. Does that make sense? Okay. So you did that. Good job. You got that done. And then, and then the next major category, which includes a lot of different layers, is program development and operationalization. Such a long word. That is, so I attached a draft version of our compliance manual. The compliance manual has about 10 attachments to it that also feed into that, different forms that folks would need to fill out, calculators to use to help determine eligibility. And so that has been a lot. I would say that's the bulk of what Christina had been spending her time on in the past 5 to 6 months, was working with a consultant to develop that manual, develop those materials, understand what it looked like in order to determine if people were qualified or eligible for the program. And so I've got a nice little mountain of paperwork, and it's, I would say that's it's going really well. There's a draft grant agreement that needs to be completed. And then there's the legal documents. So the deed restriction, and working through that further with Justin, that needs to be done. And I think that's an August, September timeframe for completion on those items. And then I did hear you though, in the last conversation, where you wanted the program to remain kind of flexible and nimble. So if it was an ADU, and maybe you don't need, a deed restriction, maybe that's the grant agreement is tight enough to be able to capture it. And so we still have some of those ongoing issues to work through, but I think I would say Layla and Christina made a ton of progress in terms of those administrative and operation items. But we do have at least 25% of the way left to go. Some of the questions I was just getting asked about inspections and who does them and when, and wrapping up these documentation pieces, making sure it all all works together. That's in that 25%. So I'm going to show you a schedule in a minute about how long I think that will take and where we're sitting and when we need to get that all done. The other item that came up was marketing. So I think we all know that if no one knows about the program, we're not going to get good projects in. And we would like to have the problem of too many good things, right? Not enough. And so I have given 0% progress towards marketing because it hasn't happened. I'll show you on the schedule where I believe marketing needs to play out. It does need to happen and it does need to be robust. The other item that you all mentioned was conversations with the taxing districts. That was slated to start up right in April of 2020, and it didn't. So that's an item that needs to get picked back up. So it's on my list of no substantial progress made on that, but does need to get picked up and continued in this year. So those are kind of the next steps. Any questions about those?
I just want to make sure that everybody understands what that taxing district conversations. I think that refers to the permanent tax abatement on affordable housing development, but I don't know that Desi probably wasn't on. I don't think he was on council last time we talked about it. And there might be folks watching who might not be remembering those conversations either. Is that right? That's what you're referring to?
Yes, thank you for saying that. Yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to. We've had kind of a one-off process going, and so there's long been a desire by council and many other members of the community to sort out how we can work collaboratively with all the taxing districts, so that when an affordable housing project wants to move forward, they can get that from everyone at the same time, and help just clear another hurdle and make them more financially possible. So yes. So there was a lot of conversation in that last meeting, sort of about strategy around that, what makes sense, who could do what outreach, and we need to kind of just pick that ball back up. So you can't really see this, as too small, and I'm going to give you one you can see better in just a second, but if you'll just humor me, this is so 2020, you amended the CET for the multifamily exemption. I would say the main workload item that was unplanned that took over 2020 was COVID business relief grants. And like I said, that was actually housed in this program until it was backfilled. So it did really help people. And thank you for being able to kind of pivot with us during that time. And then what you're seeing here, I won't go into the little action items, but the gray is kind of internal behind the scenes. I've even included this next housing goal update in gray. I probably should have made it turquoise. And then turquoise is when I see us turning more towards the public and talking more with potential applicants of the program about applying and doing more education on that side. So I want to dig into that just a little bit more. So this is what I'm calling kind of the public actions. So we would start aggressively marketing the program in November and December, which means all of those materials, everything has to be tight in September and October, so that we're sharing the right information. The housing code is expected to be adopted in December. And because of the kind of everything we've heard continuing about middle housing, the connection to the adoption of the housing code really is critical. So we want to be talking to people. And I think this timing works out really well with that as well. We're kind of catching a moment post kind of the robust engagement from the comp plan side, where people can hear the CET message. We'll be talking to them about that, getting them ready. Once it's adopted, then they can actually submit project proposals to the fund. So we'd open that up in January. Letters of intent, which I spelled wrong, are due in February. Then we would get proposals after the letters of intent process. Those would be due in March. When we talked with you before, we need to do a check-in with you all somewhere in there. I have that slated for March, kind of how we're sitting. And then we would make award decisions and then get the funding out the door, ideally in February. So this is I'm proposing a tight turnaround on these, but I do feel compelled. I think it's the right thing to do. And so this is a tentative schedule for now, but it's the one I will continue probably to advocate for, just because I think it would be nice to get get around under our belt. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and talk just a little bit about, so the pool of the grant. So the way I'm kind of looking at it right now, and you all tell me if I'm wrong, is I feel like we'd wanted to do this in 2020. We didn't do it in 2020. So we were looking at $100,000 program to work with in 2020. And so I think a $200,000 pot for 2022 makes sense for this first round. Kind of combine that. It's a little bit bigger of a pot. By all accounts, the fund can sustain that. Get it out, work it, and then see what all we need to tweak. Because sometimes you just don't know until you actually take it out. Like, oh God, that was hard to navigate. I wish you had an application process like this, or, oh, that was hard to score that way because you need to change your forms. And so we'll have to evaluate all that. But I am, and maybe if I'm wrong, let me know, but I am feeling kind of a sense of we need to get going as soon as the housing code is adopted. So that's my kind of quick summation of kind of where I think we are and what I think we have to get done between now and next April to have a program and make awards.
And when you propose 200,000, is that, it could be in either pot?
Yeah, I mean,
That would be applications for both.
Yeah, and I mean, this is where, I mean, a lot of times that happens when you have a fund type like this that there are restrictions within the fund, right? We can only, but you kind of cast that broader net to get in, and then that's part of the balancing act is, okay, I can spend this amount of money on this kind of thing, and I've got these kind of projects, and make it all kind of marry up. So yes, but you're absolutely right if what you're saying is like, I'm combining both the pots together to get you to that 200,000. It's still going to have to shake out according to those percentages in terms of eligible use, though. And I say me, this will probably be someone else doing it, which will be great. But I think my objective for right now is to keep it moving, like keep this moving so that we don't lose time in the schedule. And that we can actually launch in January even with the staff turnover.
I mean, it's also possible that we have some big developments that may come in and our pot may be bigger by January. So I guess, maybe think of 200,000 as a ballpark, but I mean, let's see what comes in. Maybe we'll want to do more.
I hear you. I think and you tell me too, I've also heard from a little bit of, I want to get going, but I also want to do it right. So I think there's a little bit of concern about wanting to be able to tweak and go a different direction as needed in the second round. So yes, I think we need to keep you all apprised of the fund balances and where we're sitting. And if, depending on where you are, it makes more sense to go bigger. But I also just wanted to be respectful of, there's a little bit of nervousness about the first round and making sure that we can learn what we need to learn before we go back out again. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think that makes good sense because I think we've done this enough times in different formats that we know that we always learn something really important by doing. And I hope, Lisa, that we get a whole bunch of stuff coming in, but all of the market forces are not indicating that we're going to have a huge influx of big projects because the cost of building is so out of whack right now. So I don't think that the next 6 months are really likely. I would love to be wrong, but when it's costing $30,000 more to build a single family home
right
across the country, and steel costs are 3 times what they were a year ago, those are some real market barriers that I think that we're contending with. So I think this is really exciting, Kelly. I'm wondering if there's a way that we could have resources for just conversations in the community to talk about this sooner than November, because we're talking to folks in the community, and it would be nice to kind of do a soft marketing push with that really tight turnaround that you're proposing there, so that we can get people ready if they're thinking about doing developments, to be part of that first application round.
Yeah, maybe I can do, if you all were soft marketing in October, I'm a little nervous much more before October. Otherwise I'd be giving you materials and then taking them back and being like, don't hand that one to anyone else. And then, but I think we could do soft. I could build into the schedule the October as sort of the council engagement, because we're doing you should be getting a housing update in that exact time frame anyway. So, because there's another issue I didn't talk about. So one of the things you all were very wanted to be really careful of when we were talking about the CET exemption is how do you make sure we're really getting benefit and not folks aren't gaming the system, that we're actually, if we're foregoing revenue, that it's for something that matters. So there's another consultant contract that is working on that specific to Coho, but that's what will turn into the formula that we use more broadly. And we are going to have more information on that. And we promise to bring that back to you in that September, October timeframe. So I feel like if we can by that time have more talking points and maybe even just a basics, like I gave you a very rough version of a CET one pager. Like if we can make that nice and fancy and something that help people understand, like here's the timeline, this is when the application is going to be accepted, here's who you can call for more. If I could have that to you by then you would have that whole month to be sharing it more broadly, and then the kind of the splashier marketing would start in November and December. Does that work?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think that, I mean, I feel like at this point I know enough to be able to say, hey, if you're thinking about developing something, know that in October I'll have a little more information for you about ways that you might be able to really do some good in the community with developing some affordable units. So,
but in the near term, if there's like, I'm going to talk to somebody next week, I'm having lunch and I need you to give me something so that I can have what I need for that conversation, just call and I will try to figure out how to get you what you need to market it in those meetings. I think you don't have to, so just know that you can always call and ask for that and I can get you something. Does that work?
Sure. Angel, did you just raise your hand? No. Okay. Lisa.
I had a couple of questions. One is I was reading the stuff about the people who go over the 120, you know, the idea of people getting outside the scope and that they wouldn't have to move, which makes sense to me at some degree, but it does seem to me there's potentially some potential for gaming the system there. Like you rent to a couple, one of whom's in grad school, and so they have one income, and then 6 months later they have $75,000 more income because the other one's out of school and earning. So that just kind of jumped out at me as like, should there be some upper limit to that?
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other thing, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, is do we need there to be financial need for the project? Or do we want it, is it an incentive we want for people to have, whether they can demonstrate the financial need that the project doesn't happen without it? Is it an incentive that we want to use irrespective of whether they can really meet some idea that the project doesn't pencil without it?
I think that's a fair question. I'm going to do the first one first, which is just very good observation, tricky problem. I don't think we have that problem entirely sorted just yet. I think within a multifamily building, it's clear to me, more clear to me how it works. It's like, okay, because we don't want to displace. We don't want our program to be the reason that somebody gets kicked out of their house, right? So you make more money now, that's fine. But hey, building owner, you've got to make another unit available that's income restricted at this level within this time frame. And you know that how we do that for the onesies, I don't have it figured out yet. So just know that I need more smart people help on that to kind of continue to work through that. So your question about an upper limit is valid. I think still it would probably be hard to have a housing program displace, even if they're just would be challenging, but I hear you, and you've pointed out a tricky issue. With respect to what was your second question about why do you have to prove the need? I think, and as you all tell me, I think that we've been trying to do this, if not but for test for Milwaukee. So we're trying to fill the spot that no one else is filling. So we want to try to get, particularly with the middle housing, we're trying to activate folks that absent this program wouldn't be able to make this unit work. So if they could do it on their own, if they had access to other resources, they do it, and great. But we're trying to find that kind of narrow population that we think maybe we have a chance to activate to construct additional units that are income restricted. So I believe that's why it's like this, is to just give us these guardrails under the belief that if folks have the means, they're doing it anyway.
I think we should sanity check that concept with developers who are doing some of this kind of work, because our actual goal is to get more affordable housing in the city. And if, developer Z, who does cottage clusters, can build in Beaverton, or can build in Milwaukee, or can build in Gresham, and what kicks it over the edge that he's going to build them in Milwaukee is that we have a little bit of an incentive. Is that necessarily a bad thing? And conversely, it sounds like we're really creating a narrow slot of individuals that are going to do this, right? They have to be producing more than 3 units.
Just in that one pot. The other side, they don't.
Well, okay, yeah, but yes. Still half the money. And they're not a big apartment complex. And yet they have financial need in order to build units that are going to be affordable. That's a tiny subset, it feels like to me, just saying. But I kind of want to go back to a bigger question.
Can I, Mark, because I have comments on this particular question. So before we move on, can we continue this conversation?
Sure. Yeah.
I feel very strongly, I think I probably was a proponent for the looking at whether or not there's a need, because I think one of the problems that I have with this program, especially in directing it toward middle housing, is that, I have concerns about benefiting people who already have had the ability to gain sort of generational wealth. And I think that there's to me, yes, one of the goals is to build affordable housing. I think one of the other things that we considered, and the reasons why we put this in here, was that reason also, is that we're trying to prevent displacement. We're trying to benefit people who really, could maybe provide, whether maybe it's splitting up one of these older, large homes that we have here in Milwaukee into, dividing into a 4-plex, or building cottage clusters where they might have some land, but so I don't necessarily agree with, I just think that there's more room for if this is something that you're concerned about, and if this is something that's going to prevent, units from being built, then, let's explore it. And I think that that's something that we look at sort of as maybe, if we put this out, it doesn't work, no units are getting developed because there isn't, there could be a lot of reasons for it, right? That's why promoting and marketing is so important, right? We need to make sure that we're actually reaching the people who could benefit from it before we decide, no good. We need to go out to the people who already have lots of money and can actually afford to build these things anyway, and provide this as another incentive. So before we moved on, I wanted to make sure that we got all sort of ideas out there on the table, because I'm still a little bit concerned about that.
And can I ask a quick question? I just want to make sure, because we are talking about 4 different pots of money here. So this pot of money that we're talking about right now is the one that you would need to build 3+ units.
That's one of the pots of money, yes.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Kelly. You.
It's okay. So when I'm talking about the pot and opening it up, I'm talking about all of it together in one round. Half of that is the residential development fund, which is, I can't remember the number I showed you. That was the 299, I think. I can't remember what the number was. Anyway, that's the amount of dollars that are sitting in that fund. And that is restricted to 3 or more. The commercial, anything that's coming through the commercial development, that fund type is not restricted to 3 or more. And it's not restricted to, just to be clear, you all have talked a lot about using it for repair and keeping existing housing. So I just don't want to lose that too. There's actually a lot of flexibility in there. In terms of the types of projects that we could receive.
Okay, thanks. That was helpful. I just wanted to make sure because I get lost in all of this.
Same. Yeah, I definitely get lost. And thank you for asking. It helps me make sure I know what I'm talking about.
Well, so on the financial need question, I mean, I could see keeping it in for the first wave and seeing if we get enough takers who demonstrate financial need, great. But I guess maybe then that's the conversation we have at the end of the second wave. The one thing I would say is that the ones who have the financial need to finish the project may also, and this is an overgeneralization, it's not going to necessarily be true, but may also have more pressure on keeping it affordable for a shorter length of time. We might find, I just think that has to also factor into our thinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you're coming in and you're building 6 cottages in a little cottage cluster, your minimum that you're going to spend is $1.5 million. So our little $40,000 grant is going to barely be a blip, right? That might cover part of the SDCs.
I do just want to say that sorry to jump in, but like part of where Layla was headed, which I think was actually really smart, is the calculation that we're doing is on foregone revenue. So we should actually be able to tell you what we believe over a 5-year period, the difference. If you were going to offer these at regular market rate versus you income restricting them, we have that delta. And that's actually what we tie our award to is the increment. So we are working to try to make it so that you can do this and you can move forward and keep yourself whole, right? Because we're backfilling that to keep it, to make it affordable. So that's where it scales. I think that's where it would scale depending on the size of the project being proposed. And that's part of what that calculation is supposed to do.
So speaking of market rate, can you put up the slide that shows the rents for the various 80%, 120%, that slide?
I think so. Hold on. All right, am I showing it?
You are indeed.
Okay.
So by this calculation, 80% for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is a basic family, is $1,742. Well, there are lots of apartments in market rate apartment complexes in Milwaukee that rent for far less than that. A. B, I don't know what the number is in Milwaukee specifically, but in America broadly, 48% of the population makes less than $30,000 a year. So we're not even beginning to get close to what those people can afford. We're not touching that end. And we're talking about subsidizing something that already exists in our market. You can go to Waverly right now and rent a 2-bedroom for substantially less than $1,700. So, we really need to be thinking about what it is we're trying to achieve here. Because I don't think 80%, let alone 120 or 140%, is something that needs to be subsidized. That's being covered by the market.
And, we recognized when we saw the disparity between our income and the Portland MSA that we're using, that these were going to be inflated numbers for Milwaukee. So maybe we do need to be talking about 60% or 50%.
Or less.
Pardon?
I would like to see the numbers on 60% and whatever, 50% and 30%, so that we have some sense of the reality of what we're talking about, because right now, this is not solving a problem.
I agree. I want to look at that too. And I think that, Kelly, I'm sorry, I don't remember from the report or from the previous meetings or from this presentation, if we had to tie it to AMI, is that part in the statute, or did we do that because that was the easiest thing to do and that we couldn't look at Milwaukee specific incomes?
I feel like we have to, but I'm going to have to go prove it. I feel like that's required. Anne, do you happen to recall?
I do believe that was a part of this, is that the statute dictated what the measurement was.
Right. It's dictating the ceiling, not the floor.
Yeah. No, I understand that.
Which tool?
I mean, what number, which tool?
Yeah.
That's my only question. And so it's,
I remember Layla coming back and telling us that, because I think we had that.
It was the tool.
I remember
Yeah.
her coming back.
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, I have I have concerns with focusing on such a high percentage, because you're always capturing that sort of like, incomes are going higher, even in Milwaukee, because folks are getting kicked out of Milwaukee. Like that is happening, and we're trying to prevent that from happening. So why are we basing our ceiling or floor, however it applies in this current scenario, on those numbers instead of like what we're hoping to achieve?
I think
I did just want to, Kelly, do you mind if I just jump in for 1 second? I don't know if this is the right answer. And Desi, actually, sorry, Counselor, you might be the right person to jump in here just because you were in those early meetings. When I would speak to Layla, part of the issue was making sure that the incentive we could provide would actually offset to the level that you were going to be charging for the units. So the lower the AMI, the harder it is to provide a big enough incentive to get you to the rent payment that you needed. And so there was some concern from her on that, is just how many units are you realistically going to be incentivizing depending on how low that number goes, because of the calculation we're working on the Coho development. If that wasn't helpful, apologies, but that was a part of that calculation cost.
Well, I apologize that I don't have all the history. I just know that you all have touched on this enough to know that I don't think, I know that I've heard it come through that this is an ongoing concern you had about the disparity and the discrepancy between the AMI and what you're seeing. So I've definitely heard it, and I was fully prepared for you all to tell me all what you're telling me right now about it. I believe there are some statutory requirements related to it that we don't control, and I can go learn about those a little bit more and circle back with you on them. And then I guess I just want to echo some of what Anne, in some cases we're casting a wide net, but that doesn't determine who we fund. I mean, you know what I mean? What projects are selected in terms of eligibility. There's some ranking and prioritization that needs to happen within there. And I do think you all made it clear on that front in terms of who you're hoping to serve. But.
And I'm also thinking about the conversation we had not that long ago with around Sparrow and the visit we had from the director of Wichita Center, and how there are people who may be at that 60 to 80% area median income, but they've got other forces. They've got child support payments, or they've got garnished wages for back taxes or whatever. They have reasons that are limiting their capacity to take advantage of programs. So I'm wondering if that's something that we help with this kind of program. Even though the numbers don't look like those people are struggling, they are struggling because of forces that are outside of their immediate control.
But literally what you're looking at in that slide that Kelly just showed you is the rents that would be acceptable when we gave them a subsidy. So if somebody is struggling financially, no matter what their income is, they still would have to pay that rent. That's the rent that they would be required to pay. For a 2-bedroom apartment would be $1,600. So that does not solve their problem.
That didn't really answer my question, but I don't think I phrased it very clearly either. So I'll just let it go.
I think there is more nuance to that I'm not incredibly expert in about if you look into in terms of that is the total cap on what you can charge a renter, period. So any of your utilities, I'm not saying it gets to the issue you're talking about, Mayor, but like that is everything that that they can charge you for. That's the cap. But I think the question remains, which is how do you make sure that we're not using this program in a way that would take a place that's cheaper and then makes it more expensive after they got a CET grant, right? I mean, like, we don't want to be adding to the problem. We want to be solving the problem. And I think, and then Council President Heisey, I believe, I hear you saying too, that there's, it's about trying to find our niche in this ecosystem we're living in. So how can we get in and use our resources in a way that helps fills a need, but doesn't attempt to solve something where you would have to provide some kind of ongoing support of like some services associated with it to make it work, because we know we won't be able to do that. So it's hard, y'all. This is a big, I can see why it's been taking a while. I can see why you've talked about it so many times. I don't claim to have all of the answers to it tonight, but I think what I'm trying to do, and I guess I'm looking for right track, wrong track, is we need to keep moving. Like, we need to keep moving. We need to get, I'm feeling that need to like get something, keep it on track, keep it scheduled, and try to hit this January date as best we can is kind of my goal right now. Does that make sense or no? Or you're like, no, I don't like it and I don't want you to do it in January. I mean, I don't like it, but I'm worried enough about these issues where I don't want you to kind of charge towards January.
The timeline's great, the sooner the better. But hurrying up to produce something that doesn't solve any problems is not worth doing, right? So we need to look at the rent level that we're talking about subsidizing. Those numbers don't work for me, straight up.
So, and we can do that and we can bring it back, and we're actually 25 minutes over on other conversations. So I do just want to be cognizant of the time. But it does go back to the thing that I did comment on earlier, which is it just means fewer units. So we can absolutely do that. It just means that we end up subsidizing fewer units. And I guess that is something I'd actually like sort of a general head nod on, is that you would rather support fewer but deeper versus wanting to support broader, more units for less.
And this is what I didn't phrase very clearly, I think, is my concern that in our drive to serve the most vulnerable, we might be missing out on the fact that we are serving people who are still vulnerable, even though the numbers don't look like it to us at first glance. And I want to do it all. I do. But I also keep hearing from Eco Northwest experts and everyone else in housing saying that the more units you make available, the better off everyone is. So I would love to do units that work for 60% and lower, but I kind of am leaning toward let's do as many units as possible and recognize that that benefits the whole system. I mean, we heard that from the Wichita Center for folks too. It's not an answer I like, but it's the pragmatism piece of me recognizes that may be the best benefit we can give, especially since the pot of money is really pretty small.
I don't want to take up more of your time. I can follow up more, Mayor, and the only thing I'd end this with is I cannot operationalize this program if I'm not pointing to somebody else's adopted table. Like, it has to be, we can't come up with our own metric. Just so you know, we have to be able to point to a thing or we'll never launch. So that's my only request, is that because I just don't want to pretend like I can make a thing I can't make. So it has to be tied to something.
I'm fine with the adopted table. The point is I'm not fine with the level we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. And we can come back and have that conversation. And just so you know, this is not staff trying to drive to one answer or the other. We just need to be clear that one answer leads to this path and the other probably leads to this path. And then staff can deliver the outcome you're looking for. But
can we have a little bit, can we have a little bit more information on that assumption? I just want to make sure I understand it. I'm not doubting that that your memory isn't correct. I'm sure it is. I want to understand that a little bit more. I'd also like us to maybe all just sort of think about the level of income that we're talking about, because if you do $20 an hour back the napkin, someone making $20 an hour is still only making less than $40,000 a year. And so we got to be really we're making a lot of assumptions on 0 to 30 is people who need wraparound services. And no, we're talking about a single mom. So lots of truth. I agree. We got to have a much better, because I'm with the mayor on this one. I don't like 80% at what this gets us. And yes, if what you're saying is true about fewer units, deeper need, that's probably where I would land.
And that's totally fair. I don't think I can answer that question until we have somebody in the position. So I think that we're probably several months out, which could push us out on January. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows, because I do want to make sure I have an edge. Kelly has done a brilliant job tonight. I want to be exceptionally clear that she actually did far better than, great, incredible job, Kelly. But I do want somebody who has this in their portfolio normally, who spent a lot of time thinking about it to actually respond on that. And I'm quoting Layla, but Layla's not here anymore. So I do want to make sure we get you up-to-date information at that time.
Well, and I mean, I appreciated what Kelly said about, wanting to get it going, but for precisely the reasons Councilor Heisey said about the housing construction place we're in now, maybe having it going in January isn't that important. Maybe next spring is fine, I mean, yeah. I think it's better to iron these questions out, even if it means delay.
And one last little piece before we get off the subject. Going through the forms and all the things that these people are going to have to figure out. And we're not talking about big developers. We're talking about one-off developers. We're talking about somebody splitting their house into 3 pieces. Those forms made my head hurt. And I kind of know what I'm talking about. Your average just homeowner who's never done anything in development or anything like that is $40,000 isn't enough money to make me do those forms. Just saying, it's got to be simplified.
So I think my schedule is not true now. So that's okay. And that's why I wanted to come and tell you it's, so I think what you need is this person replaced, the housing person replaced, and basically you'd be talking about all of this again in kind of that October meeting. You'd be gut checking it all. So you wouldn't be marketing in November and December, and you wouldn't be launching in January. That would get moved and you'd be doing more of a summer launch, I think.
I think that's true. That's correct.
Yes. Okay. That's what I needed. Thank you. It helps me. I don't have to.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. Our next item is a floating code, which is going to be brand new, I think, to all of us, other than we read the packet. And I think Samantha is going to take us, our building official, our beloved building official, I should say that.
Thank you. Samantha and building official. So what you have before you is brand new. It is brand new to Milwaukee. The state building code exempted a whole list of items last January, a year ago, January. And this was one of the things they specifically exempted. And when I came before you guys in February last year, we went through that whole list and decided kind of what we wanted to administer and what we thought didn't need to be taken care of here in Milwaukee. And this was one of the things that you said, yes, we would like to see brought forward. So I did research. I looked at the Oregon City floating code, the Portland floating code, and Sweet Home floating code, and put together a draft to go through with you guys so that you would have an idea of what we're looking at and what we wanted to change, what we wanted to administer. I did Counselor Beatty emailed me earlier and wanted to know about how this reflects with other codes in place around us. And it is consistent with other codes. There are other permits that they need to obtain. They have to get a permit from the Department of State Lands to be able to be a floating structure. And they also have to get permission from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it's not just us. This code is more, if they get permission to do it, this is how you do it safely. I know Clackamas County also had some provisions in their zoning code because they wanted a little bit more say on what type of things would be allowed. I'm envisioning this code as being more, there's some dock provisions in there because we have had docks come up a couple of different times. And I pulled provisions from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife residential dock guidelines and put them in there to maintain habitats and not create predatory areas when you put in that dock. So I did put some provisions in there for those. But this is more just if and when it ever comes up that somebody wants to do this, that we have provisions to make them do it safely. So with that, I know you guys probably have questions.
Well, I'll start us off if nobody's ready to go. So one of the things that has always made me crazy about a lot of the dock structures along the Willamette is that they are essentially made out of styrofoam, or there is a very large styrofoam component to them. And at some point when a log hits them, or there's a flood or whatever else, you have these giant pieces of styrofoam floating down the river out to sea to break down into smaller and smaller parts and be consumed by the sea life that we are rapidly killing off. If it is in our power to do so, I would like to see it mandated that nothing can be made in any way, shape, or form with styrofoam, not even as a core. Because
so on section 15.04.090 is where we address private docks. So you would like to have a section that adds no, because I have a section in there that says treated wood cannot be used because we don't want anything in there that's going to put that treated material or that treated acid or whatever it is that they're treating it release into the water. So we want no styrofoam, something to that effect in that code also is what I'm.
It's arsenic and copper in the pressure treated stuff.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can do that.
I guess I'm still confused. Is this about the Willamette? Just the Willamette? Is it about Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek and other places?
I did a bunch of research on where they're allowed, and there really isn't any. They have to apply to the Department of State Lands and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and if they approve it, then they're able to. I don't think Johnson Creek would be big enough to allow anything. I mean, dock maybe some places. I'm thinking this is going to be more at the Willamette is where I'm thinking this is going to be.
Perhaps just to make sure that that's forestalled, we could do something about the structure cannot be bigger than X percentage the width of the river or width of the body of water at that point.
At low water.
Well, but you know, if we do can't be bigger than whatever 10% of the width of the creek.
So one of the provisions in the dock portion is that the ramps and their attendant docks should not extend out into the stream more than 10% of the width of the stream measured from the ordinary high water.
So there you go.
So that was one of the restrictions.
Kellogg Creek are safe.
Correct. And that was one of the things from that Department of Fish and Wildlife guideline that they said that they recommended. So, and that made sense to me because you don't want to block anything off. So. Any other questions?
I guess it would probably be useful to us to know what the Corps of Engineers and DLCD, how they make those determinations, right? So Milwaukee Bay Park or Milwaukee Bay, ostensibly could be a place that a houseboat could float.
They don't allow houseboats unless they're in a marina. They're not considered, so you'd actually have to have some type of marina docking area. But they could, and I don't know if, since we own the Bay Park, I don't know how, I'm assuming it would be City of Milwaukee that would have to apply for the marina. But we also have that area on the other side off of Lava Drive,
Right.
that they could ostensibly put a marina in over there. I don't know how you'd get down to it. But there's a will, there's a way sometimes, I guess. So, but I can do some research into that and see what because I tried finding any information and I actually have a call into them, but I didn't get any response back to see what the criteria is for them approving a type of marina. So I will follow up with that.
Thank you.
I was just curious if we had an inventory of existing, I mean, I can think of the handful that I know about. But if we have an inventory and we know that those are all approved, and
as far as docks or houseboats, not any houseboats that I know of, but we do have a few docks down in Island Station but they haven't they haven't obviously gone through any approval process with us because, well, they did with Kelly. Kelly had to deal with one that went in. But as far as I know, we don't have any approval process for them right now anyway. So this would
no, that's not true. That's not true. There was a doc that came to Planning Commission in 2008 or something. So that's what's going to be one of my questions is how does this jive with what planning does with docs? Because they had to come to Planning Commission for an approval as well as all those, which was only one of, and at the time, I think we were told it was like 5 different state and federal agencies, not just the 2 that you mentioned. So no, there is a planning piece to this. And I noticed that this didn't come through planning. So
I did have them look it over and they didn't see anything in conflict with what their code says. And as this is more of the building end of this is how it needs to be constructed for it to be safe rather than is it allowed or not type of criteria.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have some, there's that floating structure in Kellogg Lake that I suspect has not had any kind of review. There are a couple of floating structures offshore in Island Station, but the 2 docks to the south, immediate south of Spring Park, did go through a land use process. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Anybody else?
Okay, I will make those amendments and then come bring it back before you.
Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
All right, our next item will be our comprehensive plan implementation update, code and adoption process, and this will be Farah, our senior planner.
Good evening. I'm having issues starting my video, so I'm sorry. I keep getting a failed thing from I'm here at work, so maybe that's why this is happening. I don't know. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. So hopefully it's okay. You can just listen to me instead. Yes. How about we try that instead? I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. I am going to share my screen. I'm here just quickly to give you a brief update on the implementation project, the comp plan implementation process. And oh, sorry for the audience, it's Vera Coley, Senior Planner. Sorry. Okay, let's head over to the presentation. Okay. All right. Is everyone seeing a PowerPoint presentation? Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, just a quick update again on the policy mandates for the implementation project, increasing the supply of middle housing to provide housing choice. We want to increase the tree canopy and preserve existing trees throughout the city. And we want to manage parking to enable that middle housing and to protect trees. So the project schedule, and this was briefly outlined in your staff report. We're at the June 2021 section of the project, where we are reaching a milestone, not the end product, but a milestone, which is draft code and draft maps to be submitted to DLCD in compliance with the grant and for the grant funding that we received for this project. So we will have draft code, draft zoning maps, and draft land use maps by the end of this week to submit for to close out that grant process, and then we'll enter into the code adoption process. So the draft code will sort of memorialize what the discussions have been to date with CPIC, with the surveys, with all the community engagement, with our presentations and discussions with Planning Commission and with City Council, and making sure that we're in compliance, or we're submitting draft code to DLCD in compliance with House Bill 2001, and then we'll move into the adoption phase. And so we would consider this grant or this code language to be draft, and it will have draft stamped all over it in watermarks, and then we'll move into the adoption process. But what I wanted to just let you know sort of where we are with kind of the key code amendments in this package for now, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about the adoption process in a minute. And we've talked about I think all of these with you before, so this should all feel pretty familiar. As far as the zoning goes and the zoning map itself, the draft code proposes to consolidate our 8 residential zones down to 2 zones. That's reflected here in this map. What are currently our low density zones would be consolidated. Those are R5, R7, R10 would be consolidated into a zone, and then our higher density zones, R1 through R3, would be consolidated, and that's the orange section on the map. And this meets complies with our comp plan policy to have equitable distribution of housing choices throughout the city. So that's that key amendment with the zoning map. As far as the housing itself goes, and what housing types are permitted where on what kinds of lots, this chart outlines the proposed lot size range, the permitted housing types that are being proposed in the middle column, and as a comparison, what our current zoning code allows. Again, our current zoning code doesn't allow much, so the proposed code in compliance with both the comprehensive plan and also with the minimum lot size requirements for certain housing types in House Bill 2001 does broaden what those permitted housing types would be. What you see in the highlighted in the blue are sort of the kind of the big ticket items, the major changes between our current code and the proposed code. And again, our current zoning code generally, certainly in our lower density zones, is single dwelling units with an ADU, a single dwelling unit by itself, or a duplex. That's it. So what this is opening up are the ability to build duplexes on all lots, and then triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. This chart does also reflect what we discussed. It was either the last meeting update or the one before that, but this idea of lowering the minimum lot size for a single unit dwelling, and also a duplex, of course, to 3,000 square feet being that minimum lot size. We received quite a bit of support for that idea from the Planning Commission, and so we, at this point, again, in this draft code that's going to DLCD, that's sort of where we are right now for that. And then we'll see kind of where we land when we go through the review process or the code adoption process. But that 3,000 square feet is another change. And where you see the 1,500 square feet, the row house, townhouse standards, that's required under House Bill 2001. We would also assume that that 1,500 square feet would also could also be the minimum lot size for a cottage cluster, if it was going to be a fee simple cottage cluster that actually had ownership lots within the cottage cluster, as opposed to a condominium or sort of one shared lot with the cottages on it. So that 1,500 square feet would apply to cottages as well. And that would be the only kind of single unit dwelling that would be able to take advantage of a 1,500 square foot. It would have to be a cottage within a cottage cluster. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Again, I'm learning to pause as I go through my presentations.
Yeah.
I don't know if if this is the right place for this question or not, but generally there's a question on my mind about whether we'll be sort of like ground truthing, some of these things with, when we combine them with, height restrictions, setbacks, driveways, parking, floor area ratios, like all the other things that encumber a property, because, my concern as we go through a lot of this, LCDC, DLCD, whoever it is, basically does that for us and says, hey, Milwaukee, you've good job in theory. Truth be told, you're not going to get any of these units built anywhere because of all these other restrictions. Oh, and tree canopy too.
Right. Yeah. So yes. And they actually, I think it's in this presentation, I actually have an example of one of something that's part of what we're working with. We have some examples, illustrations that are scaled and real with our consultants, and we're going to be asking them to provide more kind of illustrative examples of that, so that we do have a sense of, where does this work? How does this work? All of those things. Because you're right, we want to have the right balance of development opportunity and, development and design standards, but but make sure that they all work together so that things can actually get built. So thank you, Councilor Faulkner. It's a good point. So yes, we will be doing that. Okay. I
also have a question.
Yes, please.
Garden apartments, tiny homes, and SROs.
So the code amendments that we are working on right now deal specifically with middle housing types. So I think
Garden apartments are considered middle housing.
What is your definition of a garden apartment, Mayor? But it doesn't come up in the House Bill 2001 as a middle housing type that's defined. So I think I would want to understand what that means.
Does in every chart you ever see of middle housing, but garden apartments are those little apartment buildings that are often U-shaped.
Sure.
4 or 5 little apartments around a little plaza.
Gotcha.
It's a little L-shaped thing, and there's 4 apartments connected.
Sorry, my apologies. So if it's 4 of those, that's a quadplex. So it just isn't called a garden apartment when we're using the terminology from the House bill. Part of what, and I think we had talked about this at one of our other work sessions, is what we would prefer to streamline all of this language to just talk about the number of units and not call things by a name of something. But we need to make sure that we're not simplifying in a way that causes more complications because of how it deals with, for example, what does the county call things from an SDC's perspective, just as one example. So we would very much like to streamline our terminology so that what you just called a garden apartment, we would just call, well, it's 6 units on a lot at the end, and someone could configure that however they liked. Do you see what I hope I'm answering your question. But
so then if that's the case, then what is the limiting factor? At what point do you draw the line between an apartment complex that everyone thinks of as 3 stories and
right,
massive and scary, all that, from something that does make more sense in a sort of classic neighborhood?
No, then that's sort of where part of what Councilor Faulkner was talking about. That's where some of our development standards come in. Height requirements. So if somebody thinks of an apartment building as being 3 stories, well, that wouldn't work in what we're talking about, because our height, we are proposing for our maximum height to be maintained as what it is now, which is 2.5 stories. So 2.5 stories, 35 feet. So we would be using sort of our form-based code design and development standards as a way of dealing with the massing or the building itself, but the number of units doesn't matter. The number of units is about the lot size, it's parking, it's all of those other standards that start to tell you how many units you can build on a lot. So it won't be our code. It won't be, the zone isn't telling you that. It's the development standards, the required parking, all of those kinds of things would be sort of what helps guide how many units can happen on a lot.
So theoretically speaking, if there was a 3-acre lot, you could have a cottage cluster or a garden apartment of 20 units.
Sure. But it would be designed with, with maximum lot with
Sure.
lot coverage, vegetation, height, setbacks, all of those things come into play, just like it does for a subdivision, right? Same thing. So yes, a 3-acre parcel could have a lot of things on it under our current code as well. It would just be it would be different, but yes. So in theory, yes, that's how we're framing the code is using those as a way of designing that. As far as you mentioned SROs, we have not talked about SROs as part of this code. Tiny homes, I'm looking at kind of how other communities, I'm trying to figure out how other communities are dealing with them because they're vehicles. So that sort of brings a whole another layer of things. I know I need to have a conversation I'm glad Sam was on the call because I'll be having a conversation with her at some point too, because what I'm hearing from other communities in a lot of ways is how are they dealing with tiny homes as vehicles, as dwelling units? How does the building code deal with it? How do we deal with utilities? Because currently our code doesn't allow vehicles to connect to utilities. So there are other things that are at play that we need to figure out. Right now, it's not part of this code package that's going, certainly not that's going to DLCD at this point. But if that's something that we want to introduce, or include as part of this overall housing package, we'll need to do more research and figure out how we're going to handle that within the code. That's for both tiny homes and SROs at this point.
Yeah, I mean, those are the only two of all of these things we're talking about that actually hit a price point that's going to be below $250,000, right? Or rents that are equivalent, however you calculate the difference between the mortgage on something and the rent on something. But it's those two forms get us into significantly more affordable spaces than a cottage cluster or a row house or any of the other things we're talking about.
Do we have anything, does anything in our current code prevent somebody from operating their home as an SRO? If somebody has a large home and they want to operate it that way? I mean, I remember having a conversation with a police chief, a few police chiefs back about a home of some concern in the neighborhood here. And, he was like, we don't regulate who lives, you operate it as a room by room renting. We don't regulate that.
Yeah. No, I mean, generally it's someone that has a house, maybe it's a 4-bedroom house and they rent out 3 rooms, they have housemates. I mean, so our code wouldn't prevent someone from having housemates and sharing their kitchen. I mean, that's pretty, I wouldn't have any way of knowing how many people are doing that in the city right now. I mean, that's kind of how people make the mortgage, right? They rent out a couple bedrooms, they have housemates and that's how that, so our code would not prevent that.
But around the turn of the century, that was actually a building design.
Right.
We have some of those in this city. I think there's one up on, I want to say 28. Anyway, it's in historic.
Okay.
Between Harrison and Monroe, I think. It's got a staircase going up the side to the various rooms, and it's an older building, obviously. But that's maybe then the question: are there code restrictions that would make that difficult to do? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it seems to me, and I don't know the answer to your question, I think it's a good one, but we talk about SROs effectively as micro apartment developments in the modern day and age, where you've got a really small apartment and it has a like microwave and space for a mini fridge, but really if you want to cook, you go down the hall to a space that has a full kitchen and it's a shared space. And those developments have sprung up all over Portland. So I don't know that our building code is so different from Portland's that it would preclude them from happening here, but I don't know.
Yes, Samantha.
So the code restriction from my end is the amount of people. The residential code limits, and I want to say it's 10. But once you get over that 10 people, then it becomes a commercial occupancy and they can still do it, but then they have to have sprinklers and alarms and that type of thing. But for the building code, it's more of it's a threshold of where it becomes from residential to commercial. And I believe that's a 10 person. We've had that discussion for like the Oxford houses and that type of thing.
So it's people, not units.
Correct.
So, I mean, both my parents are one of 6 and they've got cousins who've got, 12 and 13. I don't want to get into the business of that. So I hope that we might actually take a look at that.
It actually says not related by blood.
Yeah. And I also have a kind of a concern about that too, honestly, because you could have adopted kids and other situations where families are family, right? So I don't know, I haven't looked at that. I actually searched for it recently and I couldn't find it. So I'd love to see that if you could share that with everybody at some point.
Sure, I can do that.
And I just want to ask another question related. I mean, obviously these are sort of like, residential situations where there's not, some sort of an entity involved, providing resources. But I think, Mayor, maybe, part of your point is, we're not talking about the existing situations that we know are already happening. At least what I think about when I hear you talk about these is, more of maybe it's a commercial situation, or it would be a commercial situation where someone, a business or a nonprofit or some other kind of entity is providing this as a housing, as a transitional sort of housing option. And so I don't know if it's this code package where we deal with this, but it does seem like there's an opportunity here to deal with this more broadly and looking at whether there are some code restrictions or, places where we could refine the code to make sure that we aren't preventing some solutions for, especially I think about it like for transitional housing needs or that sort of thing.
Well, for example, the county, I believe, is currently building an SRO in Gladstone designed for retired people. Low income. And it was, I believe, the first project in Clackamas County to be built with the affordable housing bond money. And they're having to do that in a multifamily zone. And that's my question. So, right, if we want to be able to allow something that looks like a house, but it has 10 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, or however one designs a current SRO, that would be allowable.
Yeah, I mean, we define a dwelling unit as having, kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping. So what you've just described, Mayor, would not be considered, 10 dwelling units. It's one dwelling unit with a lot of rooms, basically. So it wouldn't be considered multifamily because those aren't multiple dwellings. So I think we're back to kind of the design and the development standards. I don't know that we would have a use category that I would like to take a look at Gladstone. I just want to see kind of how they're, what does that look like? I mean, we're not precluding any of, I'll just call it more traditional multifamily kinds of development in our higher density zones, where we already have them, right, around downtown and around King Road and on 32nd and that sort of, so that's not changing. But it sounds like thinking about how we might, or if we want to kind of think about these kinds of housing types throughout the city, not just sort of in our more traditionally higher density zones, I guess I'll call them that. So no, it's a lot to think about.
And then back to the tiny homes, because I'm actually getting questions about this from property owners that have children that want to move back on their property with that tiny home.
Yeah.
When you say we aren't currently talking about that, that means that it wouldn't be allowed until sometime well after January.
Unless we start talking about it between now and December, certainly. And that's a matter of talking about dwellings at vehicles as dwellings. And, we'll want to understand from Samantha what that means from her code. And we will need to understand as a community how we deal with utilities and all of that sort of thing. I've looked at sort of what Portland's code. They're the only ones that I know of so far that are allowing tiny homes on residential properties, and how they're managing that and what any of that means. So if that's the case, then we'll do more research and try to figure out what we would need to say in the code to allow something like that to happen. Understanding that, tiny homes, unless they're defined in a very specific way, that includes RVs, it includes, anything that's a vehicle. If we're meaning the traditional tiny home, which is the little dwelling on a chassis that doesn't have a foundation. It doesn't mean it's small. It means it's on a chassis. There are a lot of, I don't mean to split hairs, but it actually makes a difference what we're talking about. And if that's what you mean, then that's a whole nother category, and we'll want to understand from Sam.
Well, and I think that's a conversation that this council should have, because I think probably all of us know situations where, we keep talking about these families that are sharing a home, right? That are two families are somehow sharing a home because neither one of them can afford the home. But one of the ways that that's happening in real life is that one of the families has an RV of some variety, or mobile, a travel trailer or something, and one of the families is literally living in that. So we want to make a decision about whether we're okay with that, because it's keeping somebody from being homeless, or whether we're not okay with that. And then it's back to the situation of some neighbor, turning somebody in because they're mad at them for some other thing, probably.
I think that's a really complicated issue that we would need to have more specific public outreach on. I think there's code enforcement issues around that. I think there's just all kinds of issues around that I don't see resolving that in time for this code package personally. We know we're going to have to come back and talk about hubs. We're going to have other things to talk about after this code package, and maybe that's something for a later code package.
We actually have a temporary housing scheduled, but we do require, we need to have our housing team back in place before we do that. So it was originally scheduled for November, December time period. With them coming in, it's going to be later than that, just to give them time to get their feet under them. But we do have a bunch of the work already developed for a discussion with council.
And I mean, I'm happy continuing that, this code package is dedicated to middle housing, and we're going to have we need to, I agree, Mayor, we need to have a conversation about all these other types of housing, because as Councilor Beatty just said, we haven't talked about hubs. I mean, we haven't talked about a whole host of things that I think that we need to talk to in the housing realm, that are going to be, in addition to actual permanent housing, stock, as well as transitional housing stock, because, tiny homes are the situation that you just described. In my mind, that is not stable housing. Your landlord, your friend could kick you off their property at any time. That's not stable housing. I know that I mentioned that concern of mine before. I still have it. The question is still not resolved in my mind. I want to be careful when we talk about those types of things that we're making, that we're not calling them housing necessarily.
Beats the hell out of sleeping under an off-ramp.
You know, I agree with you 100%. I'm not looking for ways to make them more, I'm not looking for ways to restrict them, but I do also want to make sure that we're not suggesting that an RV is stable housing for a family. That's, it's not.
But we also shouldn't criminalize it.
I agree.
And if I may, I just wanted to jump in that I think that's a conversation, you know, when the housing team, you know, when we're talking about that is, and it may be something that lands as a more of a programmatic kind of situation as opposed to a code situation. So it's a little more nimble and can adjust as things need to happen. So, and I know that I worked with Layla and her team a bit on kind of how to start getting that put together. So that might be something that might be a column of things that happens there that handles this sort of housing type. And it's not that I don't want to do it. I'm just saying I think it might be better put somewhere there. And we haven't really pitched this, and we certainly haven't been pitching this kind of code, this code package of middle housing as an affordable housing code or anything like that. It's a housing opportunity code is what we're talking about.
Okay. And we are at 5:35, so we have about 25 minutes till we start our regular session. Vera, are there other things that you need answers on tonight, or are there questions that have to get answered by council tonight?
This was me giving information sort of as an update. If I may, I did want to just in 1 minute tell you what our next steps are and kind of what our code adoption process is. All the things that I was going to tell you, you've heard already, kind of parking and trees and all of that stuff. So if I may, I'm going to share our circus, I'm calling it our circus schedule screen that just kind of lays out what's happening between now and December. So again, here we are in June with our draft code maps for the grant. We have a CPIC meeting this week. We are presenting to all of the NDAs that are meeting right now in June with an update. We will have an open house number 3 that kind of lets everybody know where we are right now and what's coming. July and August, we are planning, we've scheduled work sessions with the Planning Commission to work through the details of the code and refine the code. And we are planning on including and asking for written public comments. We want to track all of that. So public opportunity is throughout this process as we workshop the code. We plan to have another CPIC meeting in July. We will have Engage Milwaukee posts, more pilot articles, kind of keeping everybody moving through as we go. We are happy to come to City Council for an update in this process if you'd like. I know Peter Passarelli will be coming to you with tree code specifically. That's kind of running in its own little parallel track because it covers a lot of other things differently than our code does. But planning on in September having our public notice and have the final draft code posted in September so that, and again, more social media posts and the pilot and all of the things to let people know that we would be having our Planning Commission public hearings in October. With full public testimony, of course, as usual. We've scheduled a study session with council on the calendar in November that kind of gets us through here. We've done all of this work with Planning Commission. We have a final draft that's been recommended from Planning Commission coming to you. We would study session that with you folks for public hearings with you in December. So that's kind of how we've tracked this. Again, a lot of work happening kind of in workshops and work sessions with Planning Commission through the summer so that we can hit our hearings in October and then again in December and hopefully have our final code adopted, I guess for the holidays, I guess for Christmas is sort of the plan, if we can do that. But that's sort of generally the layout. Yes.
So just to make sure I understand, so you have not had those NDA meetings yet?
Yes, we have. We've had, hold on, 1, 2, 3. We've had 4 so far.
Okay.
Yeah, there are 2 Island Station and Lake Road do not meet in June. So those 2 NDAs, they've gotten all the information, but we haven't presented to them. Basically, we are presenting to them kind of what we've been presenting to you right now, sort of, here are the key things, here's what's coming, here's how to stay involved, here's what's happening in the fall. And we do have, and we've been sharing our the Engage Milwaukee. June 25th is sort of when the Engage Milwaukee site starts, and we'll do more email blasts so that even if the NDAs don't meet, they'll all get the information about, you know, what's happening. But yeah, we only have one left. I think there's only Ardenwald left at the end of the month.
I thought Island Station met tomorrow.
Nope, that was misleading. They are not meeting again until August.
Yep.
Okay.
So we'll be getting on their calendars again in September to get them prepped for the hearings. So we kind of want to make sure that we're, and I've signed up for a couple of dates at the farmer's market, you know, to be at the city booth to hand out stuff. So hopefully everyone will be talking about housing all summer long. That's sort of the idea. But yeah.
Thank you, Vera.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you.
Mary, you're muted.
Yes, I thought I was done. I'm sorry. Are there any questions?
You're good. I think he was trying to end the meeting.
I was trying to end the meeting, and Zoom just went completely off of, I can't even find it. So with that, I think we're adjourned from the study session, and we will come back to the regular session in about 20 minutes.
Thanks, Vera.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.